Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today, Friday, September 23rd. Duane, thank you, Grant, once again.
Thank you, Grant. We thank Grant every Friday because Grant is our hero for granting us the blessing that is the weekend. Thank you, Grant.
And we should have Grant on. It's been a while, so maybe we should TGIF Grant and have him on the show.
We do. Grant Surridge used to write for Canadian Soccer News. He's our Latin correspondent because Grant likes to read Spanish papers. So there you go. Yeah, Kevin, I hesitate. There was an article in the New York Times today. It was detailing. I'm so sorry. Turf.
What?
What?
Turf. Did you say turf?
Yeah.
Come on. Let's talk about turf. Let's talk about turf. Let's talk about all the good things and the bad things that make me. Let's talk about turf. Let's talk about turf. Let's talk about turf.
Let's talk about turf. The U.S. women's national team, an article in the New York Times, which goes into great detail about this, is once again in a dispute with the Federation over playing games on artificial surfaces, on turf, as we say. Kevin, we talked a lot about this. We have a bumper. If you're a new listener to us, that bumper was played a great deal in the lead up to the 2015 Women's World Cup when, of course, the U.S. women, not the U.S. women, a bunch of international women took I guess basically the World Cup to the Ontario Tribunal for Human Rights, which is not a court. It is a tribunal at any rate. I went into a great deal to describe all this back at the time. You can find it on my archives in Canadian Soccer News if you're so inclined to go back and revisit that issue. Ultimately, that case never got heard. They pulled it after they came to an agreement to do so. The World Cup, of course, went on as was intended to, and was played on artificial turf. The first time a FIFA event has such been played with that. The women, the U.S. women, were very vocal about their belief that the surface was inferior and, in fact, was a sexual, like a violation of their rights. It was a sexual discrimination complaint, basically. So they're back at it. And pretty much universally, if you look at the opinion, and most people are on the women's side here, they believe that this is a violation of the rights, that they don't make the men play on turf, that they play these games in such a way that does not take the women's desires into consideration. There is language in their new CBA, which is detailed in the New York Times piece, which does say that the U.S. should do all due consideration to take the women's desire to not play into turf into consideration. So there is that part of the argument. The U.S. Federation and the women agreed to not put no turf period into the agreement because they didn't want to shut out markets like Seattle and Portland, which are very good for them. They also had a great game in Cincinnati, which was played on turf in front of 27,000 people. They didn't want to eliminate the possibility of playing games in those markets. So it's kind of like a pick and choose thing here. And this is where, Kevin, and I'll let you jump in after this, it's where I kind of have an issue with this, is because, look, first, I just don't believe it's sexual discrimination, not because I don't think that happens in certain cases, and not because I don't think the U.S. women have had issues that were legitimately something that they should have been fighting for in the past. I just think this particular hill that they're dying on is the wrong hill to die on because, Kevin, I'm a person who believes in science and research and independently peer-reviewed research, and all of the science, all of the independently peer-reviewed research, and this is not research that's been paid for by turf companies, all of it says one thing: it's not more dangerous.
No,
and if it's not more.
The caveat that we always say, it's the injuries that you will receive and the aches and pains of a player playing on turf will be different than one on grass. And for a player, especially if you are a professional player at that level with all your years of experience that made you to this point, you have a lot more experience on grass than on turf, and it will feel different. It will feel like a different beast, and you will feel like you're injured or aches and pains at different spots of your body that don't heal it the same way. You're not used to that pain and more cumbersome. Yeah, we're not saying it's perfect at all, and it's not. We're not saying it's the best for them, but the usage of the premise that is that decision is made only on, well, not only, but made by for the sex reasons. If it's the man, then we don't play on turf, and women, we allow them to play on turf, and we almost force them on turf. I don't see that ground. I don't see grounds there for the lawsuit.
Yeah, look, the preference thing, and I'll get to that in a minute. And look, I do hear that because there is no doubt that players believe that it is more dangerous. Players believe that it is harder on their bodies. Players believe that it is worse for them and that it will shorten their careers, and it is something that they don't want to do. And that goes doubly on the men's side. And this is where the women do have a bit of a point. I'll say, I'll leave the a bit of out of it, is that the federation does seem to take the men's concerns more into the consideration than they do the women's. And that's problematic. That's, I think, something that maybe is needs to change, obviously needs to change. But in terms of the reasoning behind why they don't want to play there, it just doesn't back it up, Kevin. There's one again, if you go in Canadian Soccer News, and I'll try and dig the links up and put them out later today, but if you just Google them and look for them, you'll find them. I had a very comprehensive sort of survey of all the research that I published back in 2014, likely. It, again, universal. There was a study that I recall that was done in Sweden, which they looked at a professional team in a professional league over the course of an entire season. So we're talking like they're surveying a massive amount of N here. And they found, and they compared it with the grass and the whole, they had everything done in the right way, peer reviewed, the whole 9 yards. And it quite clearly said that the types of injuries were slightly different, but the overall injury rate was no different whatsoever. Now, the caveat to this is that there is an area that I do see a difference with turf, having working with it quite closely at League One all the time. That's the heat issue, and that is not so much a problem in the fall when these games would be taking place,
but in the summer, yeah. Summer
but in the summer,
fall. The Montreal Marathon has been canceled Sunday because it's going to be 40 degrees Celsius on September 24th.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can say the fall. You can say it's hot enough in the fall now, too.
Yes, the weather isn't changing at all in the world. But at any rate, speaking of peer-reviewed science,
I just like it's the best weeks of summer right now. The last 2 weeks it's been like 30 degrees every day and sunny and no rain, nothing.
Yes, why?
My bonsai's dying. Need rain.
Yes, exactly. I came home this morning at 7:30. I was at a friend's last night, and I was walking in and going, "This feels like July. Like, what's going on?" At any rate, yeah, back to the turf. It's look, I always feel so like I'm at odds. I'm contentious about. They're like, people are going to take issue with me not being 100% supportive of this, thinking that it's me not liking women's football or something like that. And I always kind of defensive about that when I get into this. But again, I believe in science, and the science just isn't there to back this up.
Okay, so
now,
so what I'm questioning myself now, Duane, is what's the end goal of this? What's the point? What's the agenda? What is the goal, no pun intended, of the U.S. women's national team with this litigation right now?
Well, it's not litigation. They're just complaining.
Complaining. Yes. That complaint, that's CRRPD complaint. What it is, what's the agenda right now? What's the possible outcome, and how can it benefit the players depending on the outcome of this thing?
They just don't want to play on turf. That's all really what it comes down to. So I think unless it's turf that they like, and that's a bit of a problematic. I think that if you don't want to play on turf, you're going to have to put it into a CBA and the next time the CBA negotiations come up, if they really want to prioritize this, I suppose that they could fight for it and say that we're just not going to play on turf. But I don't think you can put a rider in there in the CBA that makes a lot of sense. It says, I don't want to play on turf unless it's in Portland. I mean, I suppose you could put that directly in it, but it's not going to make a ton of interest. Or you could ask to have, right now they have to be consulted, they have to be sort of considered for the scheduling issues. But I think you could put it in another CBA saying that they have to, agree to the issues. They have to be equal partners in scheduling. That's the only thing that we can really do here, that they can really try and accomplish with this. They're trying to use their leverage and public pressure to shame or force the USSF into not scheduling these games on turf next year. They're willing to play a few of them, but they don't want to play the majority of them on turf. And that's their end goal.
I know it sounds terrible for us to say like, we're not necessarily 100% behind this, but it's because we don't have just this example in mind. Because right now, turf, at a global level, in the world of football, is revolutionizing the game, is making the game more popular and accessible in part of the world, and for part of the population, mostly for women as well, accessible to play. Because where there was not grass pitch sustainable, now there is a turf pitch that's there year round that you can play even if it's a downpour out there. So you have different spots in the entire world, in the global scheme, in the global community of football right now that are growing, and it's some part because of turf and what the advantages of Generation 3 turf, and that's another different as well. I think it has to be mentioned in complaints that there's a big difference between playing in Generation 1, Generation 2, because there's still some of those turfs out there, and we agree Generation 3 and what's going to come out very soon, Generation 4, and the hybrids of real blades of grass with some sewn plastic ones in it. It is going to continue to revolutionize, and we have to keep an open mind as well. So it's always a bit controversial in my mind when we decide black or white. No, we're against this thing. Come on, you got to keep an open mind and the global picture in mind, not just this instance.
Yeah, well, the hybrid surfaces right now, which are 98% grass, it's silly to even call them turf. It's kind of disingenuous. And I know that when the BMO Field discussions were taking place, they ended up not going with that. But there was a lot of people that were like, oh, you can't have the hybrid. And it's like, come on, man. And look, the reason, people may point out that I seem to have a contradictory opinion when it comes to turf at BMO versus this sort of issue. And I understand on the surface why that may seem so. But again, this comes down to player preference. And when you're talking about a club situation, you don't want the club to be burdened with the idea of having to fight this perception that's out there that the surface is inferior, even if I don't believe that to be the case. So that's where that opinion comes from. Kevin, look, hopefully we don't talk about this too much moving forward. But as I said, there's a lot out there in our archives, in my written archives, which we'll discuss this in greater detail. The last thought on this, and the reason I think that sometimes gets overlooked in terms of why this is complicated, is because part of the mandate of the U.S. women playing these friendlies is to fund the program. They're compensated in a way that is not directly the same as the men, but is much more is a much more valuable compensation package for them now than it was in the past. So they have to make money to do that. And also, there still is within the women's game and sort of a need with the women's game that doesn't necessarily exist on the men's side for them to get into places that don't have glorious glass pitches. They want to sell the game. They want to sell themselves. They want to get out to inspire young girls in parts of the country, parts of the United States that just don't have the facilities that aren't turf based. And I think it would be a real shame to shut out those markets simply because of this belief that these players have, this held fast belief that the surface is inferior. Look, if research comes out to contradict the current claims, the current research that's out there that says that it's more dangerous, then I'm 100% behind it. But until that happens, I've got to look at the science, and I believe in the science. All right, we wanted to talk about David Villa.
Yes, before we do the game of the weekend, we'll talk about the situation where New York needs to play. Yeah, because, well, the Yankees need their stadium, so New York got to figure out what to do. And NYCFC is going to Connecticut. David Villa took pen to paper and wrote a few words. Did he actually take his own pen and his own paper? Who knows? But it was on his social media, so it goes a little something like this. Hello, friends and NYCFC fans. Of course, I was not going to do an accent, so bear with me.
No.
As you know, our next MLS fixture is in East Hartford, Connecticut at the Pratt & Whitney Stadium, which is kind of far away from the Yankee Stadium. I know it is hard for everyone to travel over there. It is hard for us as well, believe me. But we have to keep in mind that building a great club from the ground up in one of the best cities in the world comes with its challenges. This club has accomplished amazing things, but we wouldn't have been able to do so without your unconditional support. That is why I ask you that this Saturday you take a trip to ticket so that you can cheer us on, as you always do at the Yankee Stadium. Let's stay united like we've always been. Let's keep working hard. Let's face this challenge, face the challenges together to show that no matter how many obstacles we encounter, we'll still continue to write the story of a club that was built from nothing and has always had the optimism needed to grow bigger each day. Together, we'll continue to make this happen. Together, we're stronger. You would swear they got relegated or something.
Exactly. One game in Hartford. Yeah, not ideal situation, obviously, and the Red Bulls fans are having a blast with it. But I'll be curious to see what kind of crowd they do get out there. I'm sure that the locals in Hartford, a few will be interested to show up, and that they'll probably get a fairly decent crowd. And, look, if you're an NYCFC fan, think of it as a bit of an adventure. It's always fun to go to a different city, and it's not that far away. You can take the train there. You can make a day of it. I know it's only Hartford, but nonetheless, why not?
They're gone, so there's no way to see, but...
Yeah, exactly. All right. Take a break, Kevin. Let's come back and do the game.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple, Google Play Store, TuneIn, iHeart, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane, before we go on to talk about the games of the week, there's an event next Saturday that I'm taking part of. I'm riding 50 kilometers. And yeah, it might not seem a lot. And if you know me in my past, I've been cycling a lot more than that. But I haven't ridden all summer. I haven't taken any time I didn't have any time this summer to ride, but I'm doing it for a great cause. It's for the Ride for Refuge for the St. James Drop-In Center. Go on my social media. You can find the link to sponsor. Your money goes a long way. It's a day center for the homeless and marginalized, and we take time out of the day to help them with a meal, with a conversation, with a place to feel safe, and that goes a long way. And next Saturday, September 30th, I'm riding for them.
And I will be making a donation to West Burdine's charity of choice for $50 because my preseason prediction that that Minnesota United would not get more than 25 points was in fact surpassed last week. So I will make that donation probably later today because my pay went in.
Yeah, it's wow. Like it's still only 5 weeks out of the end of the season, but yes, and the 9 points. Yeah, that was done a long time ago.
Yeah, in my defense, when I made that bet, it did not look like it would happen, and they
had
made
like 5
some
players.
changes.
They had like 5 players when you made that bet or something.
Yeah, well, it was the Sam Cronin trade, and we'll talk to Wes. We're gonna have Wes on the show to talk about it next week. We'll talk about Minnesota's season and sort of how they turned it around a little bit there. I know that when we had him on last, he said that he wasn't particularly happy with the season overall. He thought it was not necessarily where he felt it should be, but yeah, I think if you look at the way they started,
realistically, they're not in the playoff. They're not going to go on a run right now, and that's the type of disappointment that I can understand. If you're looking at it not like just it's an expansion team. If you look at it objectively, it is a disappointing season.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's look at the game. We didn't review the EFL Cup on the week last week, so real quickly, the draw was held after the final round. I'll just quickly go over those games, and we can talk about when any of them jump out.
Mean the Carabao Cup? Because there's a sponsor again. Last year it went from the Capital One Cup to the League Cup. Now back to Carabao Cup. There's something about sponsors and companies that starts with C with this tournament.
Yes, Carling. What was it? Carling Capital One, and now
Carabao.
Carabao, which is, I don't even know what they do.
It's a bowl. I know it's a bowl because they sponsor Chelsea. So I've been, but is it a drink? I think it must be a drink or something.
I don't know. I think it's an Asian company because they had the draw in China. All right, the round of 16 draw is out. Swansea, Man United, Bristol City, Crystal Palace, Leicester, Leeds, the El Derby there. Spurs, West Ham, who will play tomorrow as well. Chelsea and Everton, which is probably your most competitive, I guess, in terms of the top of the table matchup in this. Bournemouth, Middlesbrough, City will play Wolves. Long time since that's happened. And Arsenal, Norwich. So I don't know. There's not really any exciting. Bristol City, the smallest club still left in this. Really, I think Leeds, I think, is an interesting story. The way they're playing in the championship, whether they'll want to continue to go on a run in a cup final as well. Kind of nothing that's unexpected though, and you anticipate that the quarterfinals is probably going to be all Premier League at this point, just based on how these teams are playing. I watched City's game. It was the only action I was able to watch. 2-1. They did finally allow a goal after 18 consecutive goals. 4. They did allow one to allow the game to be tied. Well, West Brom to tie it, even though City had dominant performance up till the end. But then Sané had just one screamer of an end-to-end rush that he scored. It was a Bobby Orr type goal, to put a Canadian reference in there, and a game-winning goal for them. Kevin,
bye-bye Liverpool. That's my thought, Duane. Bye-bye Liverpool. It's Liverpool out of another tournament.
Yeah, and look, I kind of want to have a conversation about Jurgen Klopp, and I've been thinking about it. It's been in the back of my mind all week to put it in the lineup, but just other stuff's come up. So maybe next week, we'll see what they do on the weekend. We should talk about what Klopp's doing there, whether or not he deserves this deity status that he's been given amongst many Liverpool supporters. Because if you look at his record right now, Kevin, it's actually worse than Brendan Rodgers was.
Yeah, and Brendan Rodgers brought something, I don't know. I never was against Brendan Rodgers. And maybe it's just my bias and watching Liverpool. Maybe I drank the Kool-Aid. Maybe. But when I look at Jurgen Klopp right now, it reminds me of a terrible barbecue chef. All steak, no sizzle.
There you go. He does. He's very charming. I've heard that. I was listening to some podcasts, some English podcasts, where they talk about that. The journalists say that they go in and Klopp just has this ability to manipulate's a strong way to put it, but just to make journalists feel like he's their buddy. And that, in turn, their suggestion was it was a Guardian, I believe, was that this then makes them sort of like lose their ability to like challenge him in a way that they might another manager. And that's an interesting thing. And that's something that I think more managers need to figure out how to do, because the media in the UK is.
We rub shoulders with managers, especially in Major League Soccer at press conferences. And I'm not going to name names because that's not the point, but there's some managers that are really good at that, and some others that are just themselves. And there's a big. This is something like it is a thing, and maybe we should take an eye on it, take a look on it.
Well, Greg Vanney, not that there's any argument to fire Greg Vanney at all, but what he's very good at is he doesn't make you feel like a buddy, but he will always take your question and thoughtfully answer it, which a journalists appreciate because it helps him do the job, right? And I know the guys that cover him daily will talk at length about how thoughtful and how, accommodating he is to them, and that just goes a long way. And I think it's a lesson that some managers need to learn a little bit more. If you're accommodating and thoughtful, that you're going to probably get a longer rope than you might otherwise. So
yeah, it's perception is reality, right? So your fan base doesn't see you on a day-to-day basis behind closed doors and on that training pitch and in that video room. They see the interaction with the journalists, and that interaction with journalists dictates usually the outcome of a piece of paper, the outcome of a radio show, the outcome of a podcast, and the outcome of coverage. And that gives a perception to the fan. So it's all related. But let's talk about MLS games this weekend. We've talked about NYCFC versus Houston in Hartford.
Yeah, and look, with Montreal's victory over Toronto, that does make it somewhat unlikely that the Shield will be clinched this weekend. You would need to have a loss-win situation. So Houston would need to beat NYCFC in Hartford, and then Toronto would have to win New England, which is the first two games of the weekend. So we'll learn very quickly. That probably is the most interesting game to me, is the NYCFC Houston game. I'll probably be watching it too, because it does have a direct Supporters Shield implication there. If the opposite happens of the clinch, NYC wins, Toronto loses a second game in a row. Do we start talking about this race being back on? Be 7 points.
You know what it reminds me of? Last year's Premier League race. Toronto's Chelsea, and NYCFC one of the other contenders that faltered at the end, but was kind of close. But is the title back open when it's like in reach of 9 points, 6 points? Yes and no.
Yeah, I think that it would take we said on Tuesday it would take a collapse by Toronto. They would need to lose something like 4 of the last 5, I think, for New York to have a true chance. Because even if Toronto does collapse, New York still has to have like a very strong finish to catch up at that point. There's 11 out of 15 points they would have needed. So it's not impossible, but it certainly seemed highly unlikely. And we talked about the Derby loss yesterday, or win, depending on your perspective. It didn't seem like a game, and I'll reiterate it now. It didn't seem like a team that was choking or that was collapsing or that was found out. It just seems like a bad day at the office where everything that could have went wrong. You're not going to see Alex Bono kick a ball off his ass again and into the goal. Like, that's not going to happen.
No? Come on.
It's got to be goal of the week, eh?
It has to be goal of the week and like blooper of the week.
Yeah, it was. Well, it'll be.
It was it was in the Dannies. It's like the new Dan. They're back on Sports Center in Canada. Thank you, Fox Sports, for firing them. So they're back up here, and it was shown a lot. And you know what? We didn't talk about this. I like that too. That for Wednesday night and Saturday morning on TSN, Sportsnet, RTS, and TV Sport, all sports news shows opened up with highlights of Montreal against Toronto, MLS. And that's during NFL season, during NHL training camp. We're making strides.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they still talked about Joffrey Loophole's failed physical here on Talk Radio today, but that's,
I'm snowing. Cheaters. Snowboarding, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so, it's not completely there. I mean, you have 24 hours of programming. I guess you have to talk about stuff like that. But regardless, and what was Tim Bezbachenko was on Primetime Sports. He was interviewed by Bob McCown, notorious soccer hater, did a full TFC segment on Primetime last week. So, and then they turn on and lose the next game. So maybe that'll go out the window. Maybe it is a curse there.
And then Bob's going to trash him. Maybe he trashed him last night.
All right. So obviously, quickly go through the schedule here. We talked about NYCFC and Houston, New England, and Toronto is the other game there. The rest of the schedule goes as sorts. DC United, San Jose, Columbus, New York, the Red Bulls, obviously. RSL in Seattle, that's a big one there for RSL if they have any chance. They have the 2 games extra played. They need to pretty much win out their schedule, I think.
Columbus, New York is huge for Montreal's implication in the playoff. What do you want more, though? And we'll take a look at the standings. So while you mentioned the rest of the game, I'll do some math.
Okay, so you want to draw there probably. Philly, Chicago, Minnesota, Dallas, must win for the Dallas Stars. I was about to say, and Colorado at 10. The final game on Saturday. On Sunday, we have a few games on the docket. SKC, the champions SKC, they will take on the LA Galaxy, Portland, Orlando, and Atlanta, Montreal. If they win 2 in a row, then maybe I'm willing to talk about them back in the playoff race, depending on the math that takes place with that Columbus game. Are we cheering for the draw there?
And it's kind of counterintuitive, so bear with me, okay? Columbus is playing New York, and a draw could be good, but a draw would give Columbus 45 points with 3 games left, and would give New York 43 points with 5 games left. So what you actually want to happen is for New York to beat Columbus. New York gets 3 points. They go in 5th position with 45 points. Columbus stays at 44 in 6th position, but with only 3 games left. Montreal, at that point, has 39 points with 5 games left. So, yes, if they beat Atlanta on Sunday and New York beats the Crew on Saturday, talking about 3 points with 2 games in hand. 1 game in hand. So there's a tie possibility, and the differential is actually a lot better for Montreal now. It's back even, which is the case for Columbus. So the next few games will dictate the outcome. But Columbus, if they lose against New York, becomes a target for Montreal and a reachable one. And that 5 scored is now very important. And yes, it would have been a lot more positive for the Impact to not concede the 2 late Tustin Rickett goal, because they would have been +2 in their differential right now. But still, 49 goals for, was 49 against. 49 is a lot, but at least they scored 49 goals. The performances of the 4 straight wins last month and this 5-goal performance by Montreal actually helped them more than we just in the points column. But a win against Atlanta is almost necessary with a win of the Red Bulls versus the Crew. And I know it's counterintuitive. Red Bulls are 6th and Columbus Crew are 5th. But trust me, 2 games different of played this season so far for the Red Bulls. You want them to beat the Crew. The Crew becomes an attainable target with a differential in reach.
Just win, baby, is basically what I would say to all of that. Obviously, you want to look at the other results, but if you're an Impact fan, I think, or if you're the Impact, period, the prime concern right now just really has to be yourself and to follow up on what was a good performance.
But there's a way. Like, we actually can find a way. Before, there was, like last week, before the win against Toronto, there was no hope for Montreal to find an easy way to the playoff and find that path and be aware. Now you know Red Bull beats Columbus, and you need still Columbus to lose a few games here and there as well. But at least the differential is now like back into play, which it wasn't for the entire season. I remember Montreal minus 10 or something at one point.
Yes. All right. And a final lesson for on that game and on the TFC game Wednesday. TFC fans need to stop doing trolling tifos, because every time they do a trolling tifo, Montreal ends up beating them at home. So there you go. Just ignore them is the lesson that was learned there. The LOL garbage bag reference tifo was funny on some levels, but it was one of those, it was so inside jokey that I don't think many people got it anyway. All right. Kevin, any other games jump in? The Leicester Liverpool is the other game of the weekend. If we extend this to the Premier League, that really interests me a great deal, because obviously we talked about Klopp a little bit a minute ago. We talked about Liverpool kind of sputtering a little bit after looking pretty good the first couple weeks. I think they really kind of need to lay a marker down to sort of stop the bleeding a little bit here. Otherwise, the entire city of Liverpool is having the opposite kind of season that the city of Manchester is having when you look at the results on both of those clubs.
How big was the Coutinho factor? How big of a distraction was it? Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at the result now. My game in the in the Barclays Premier League Sunday, Duane. Brighton versus Newcastle. A battle of newly promoted team. Newcastle is doing amazingly this season so far, and the Magpies, I think, have a shot to win away at the beautiful Brighton Stadium on Sunday, going south and maybe getting the result of Jordan as well. And I have a feeling with Rafa Benitez and the way they're structured, they might be up for a while, and their results are actually impressive this year, and we haven't talked about it a lot, but Newcastle doing a great job in their newly promoted season.
Yeah, and exactly. Well, they're in a Champions League spot right now. No, I don't think they're going to stay that high all year, but nonetheless, you have to give them credit. And Newcastle's a club that should be consistently, they should be a top 10 Premier League club. The support that they have, the history behind that club, the fact that they've been a yo-yo team the last decade really is a testament to poor ownership and poor decisions up there. And if they can, Ashley's not going anywhere, so if they can overcome that and win despite that, then hats off. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Newcastle, and they have to. I believe that they probably, if you look at their worldwide support, it's still pretty big, because they had some great times in the 90s, and there's a lot of people, particularly people my age, that first started watching the Premier League in a time when Newcastle was a contending team, and they adopted
and
that.
Alan Shearer, yeah, in the time of Alan Shearer and the goals scored and all the highlights, yeah.
Yeah, so there are a lot of support for that club, and it is a lot of support locally for that club, obviously, as well. 50,000 at St. James all the time there. So kind of a nice little story early on there. We'll see whether they can sustain it. But I think when you're looking at a club like Newcastle, the way to look at hot starts like this is points in the border, points in the pocket, and you kind of have to hit that magic 40 to stay up. And if you're already sort of on the way, then hey, great for them, because that's survival and the ability to build upon a successful Premier League season by buying more players to go into the Premier League and continue to build yourself up slowly, so you reestablish yourself as a consistent contender, a consistent player in that league. That's how you have to do it if you don't have billions, and they don't. So alas, well, good for them. All right, Kevin, any final thoughts on the day?
I'm interested by the game on Sunday, of course, for Montreal and all the playoff ramifications. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We'll be back Monday with another edition of Soccer Today. And as always, until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.